Hello, everyone, and welcome in to this very special episode of the Bear Down Buzz podcast. As usual, myself, Eli, Joe, and Isaac. Gentlemen, it was kind of funny because last episode I did close off the outro saying how the Bears probably at this time next week would not have hired a head coach, and maybe we'd get some more news on the coaching cycle. But then a lot happened over the weekend. Obviously, the Detroit Lions losing in an upset to the Washington Commanders. Jaden Daniels headed to the NFC Championship to face the Philadelphia Eagles, and that obviously meant that both candidates for the Detroit Lions were available, and the Bears pulled the trigger and got the top candidate of the hiring cycle in Ben Johnson. He is now officially the Bears head coach, and we'll just start it off, Isaac, first with you. Your initial reaction of Ben Johnson, the top candidate in this hiring cycle, becoming the next head coach of our beloved Chicago Bears?
So first of all, I love it. That was the guy we all wanted. So very happy for that. And a lot of NFL personalities were kind of talking about this when Ben Johnson was hired. It's crazy how usually NFL or coaching head coach candidates never choose the Bears if they have options, right? And for Ben Johnson, this was the most sought out after head coaching candidate in the NFL. The Jaguars were super interested in him, the Raiders were super interested in him, and yet he chose the Bears, which is kind of nice finally that we're seeing our team not be kind of the laughing stock and oh it's the Bears, like no one wants to come to the Bears. Like that's not true anymore. We have Caleb Williams, we have pieces around, and Ben Johnson actually wanted to come to Chicago, so there's that. And it's really crazy how we were kind of talking about this earlier, how everything just happened so quick. Like, and I'm so thankful for that because the Jaguars announced today that they fired Trent Baalke, their GM, which I don't know why they would do that after, all these coaching candidates they could have had a better opportunity to hire their guy at head coach if they hired Baalke or they fired Baalke earlier, but they didn't. And it's really it was an indictment of when Liam Cohen, the guy that they supposedly, were locked in on, he decided, you know what, I don't want to go to Jacksonville. I want to stay in Tampa Bay. I believe he's going to be one of the higher paid offensive coordinators, around 4.5 million a year. So I'm just glad that it happened. And there's just a lot of joy right now for Bears fans everywhere. We got our guy, and we'll kind of go into more detail about it later. But Joe, what were your thoughts when the Bears hired Ben Johnson?
Yeah, just like you said, I was surprised and super surprised on how fast this happened. I figured the Bears would have somebody hired by Wednesday. Well, we're recording today, so Wednesday's today, but I figured they'd have somebody hired by Wednesday. I didn't think it'd be Monday. I thought it'd be maybe Tuesday. Maybe they hire them on Wednesday. I did. I had this sinking feeling though it was going to be Mike McCarthy, just because I thought Ben Johnson was going to go to the Raiders, which obviously didn't happen, which I'm so happy about. Um, Again, a lot of people are like, there wasn't really like a big shot that happens because they don't have a quarterback, but anything's possible, especially because their GM is or their GM is Tom Brady, or Tom Brady owns partial stake in their team. Um, so I was just surprised that we got him. Uh, we got Ben Johnson, and I wasn't expecting it to happen in less than 48 hours since he lost the game, the divisional round. In the divisional round, I like I said, I thought it'd take maybe Tuesday, maybe Wednesday. Um, but yeah, I'm happy that we got him. I'm. I don't think I was as happy as a lot of other people. I'm. I am really optimistic after hearing his press conference. But when we first signed him, I was happy, but I was also like, okay, well, if this doesn't work out, then we got outsided and it's not going to work out. But we obviously don't know if it's going to work out or not until it does. Things happen. Things haven't happened yet, so we don't know the future. We can't tell the future. We can only hope that the future is bright. And it sounded bright after the press conferences today on Wednesday. So I'll pass it over to you, Eli, if you have any other thoughts on the hiring process of Ben Johnson. Uh, Share them.
Yes. So the main thing in this, not the main thing, but rather a big part of this that kind of surprised me also, and a lot of people, um, not having Ben Johnson interviewed in person and him still accepting the job. I thought, you know, all this time I kind of thought that it felt like the Bears were trying to lure in Ben Johnson and that the Bears were the ones pursuing Ben Johnson. And to a degree they were, obviously, but it kind of shocks me how interested Ben Johnson was in this job, and for him to, you know, as you guys laid it out, probably about 48 hours after losing in the divisional round, just accepting the job without wanting to come in person first, it had to have been a pretty good impression from Ryan Poles, Kevin Warren, and George McCaskey, which is another underrated part of this that we need to talk about. But it makes me feel a lot better about the hire. Obviously, we're all excited that Ben Johnson is here, but for for Ben Johnson to be the one interested in this job and not just the Bears wanting to get the top candidate, I think is a really underrated part of this. We all saw the videos of him being welcomed at Hallis Hall and him making the whole jokes and everything like that, which we'll get into later. But it really seems like Ben Johnson wanted to come here. And wants to take this Bears roster to where we all think it can be. Um, so to really get into it, today there were the introductory press conferences. Ryan Poles introduced Ben Johnson as our new head coach, and he had a lot of good things to say. And it's always a cycle with Bears fans that new head coaches or new whoever comes to the podium and they deliver these speeches and they instill this confidence and then it all falls apart later on. But to me, and then I'll ask you guys as well, but to me, it seemed like everything that this fan base was concerned about to some degree was addressed by Ben Johnson in these press conferences. In these press conferences and in the interview process from everything that's been reported. Whether it come down to, game clock management, coming down to accountability, which are two huge things that were a topic of conversation this season. So it felt like Ben Johnson kind of addressed everything that the Bears fan base needed to hear and the Bears front office needed to hear from a head coaching prospect. But excuse me, Joe, I'll start with you this time. What from these press conferences did you really like to hear, not only from Ben Johnson, but from the rest of the front office for the Chicago Bears?
Well, first, I want to start off with I think Ben Johnson did a lot better in his first press conference than Matty Rufus ever did in any of his press conferences, which is crazy. It was just an introductory press conference, and he didn't. I mean, he said stuff of substance, obviously, but it wasn't like anything important. Anything like I don't important's not the word, but like it just was different. It felt different. It felt almost like you were listening to Dan Campbell. Obviously, he's not Dan Campbell, but he learned under Dan Campbell. And Dan Campbell has this different. Dan Campbell's just a different type of head coach. He's one of one. So it's Ben Johnson. It seems like, but like, there's no other head coach that's like Dan Campbell in this league. He's the most emotional and real head coach you'll ever see. I don't think I've ever seen any other head coach cry on the podium talking about his team. Um, but my two favorite things out of Ben Johnson's mouth um, today were one, he was talking about the fact that he didn't want to leave this division because he knows this division and he respects the coaches in this division. Um, but he brought up the fact that he enjoys that he's beating the Packers and Matt LaFleur every time he's played them, which, hey, I love to hear that because we need to beat the Packers more. This rivalry hasn't been a rivalry the past 6 years because we've only beaten them once, and that was in Week 18 this year. If Ben Johnson could bring an edge in a victory over an edge over the floor, which again we have never had, we haven't really had an edge over the Packers in coaching probably since Lovie Smith. So having that again, having that potential again is really nice to uh hear and hopefully see at some point over these next 2 years. Um, but I just thought it was um funny how he was like, yeah, I expect um Kevin O'Connell and Dan Campbell, obviously. He didn't really say he respected um Matt LaFleur, although he probably does, but he did say he likes to beat him. Like I said, we like to hear that because we hate the Packers here. Um, and then the other thing, major thing that he brought up was how the NFL has moved away and quarterback play has moved away from um turning the ball over, or like turnovers is the way you win in this league, or like not turning the ball over doesn't equate to like winning games, which we saw this year because the Bears and Caleb Williams went on that 10-game interceptionless streak, and they didn't turn the ball over at all on offense, and they were winning the battle, but they weren't winning games. And Ben Johnson seems to understand that, and he said something along the lines of, "We're not gonna play to win the turnover battle. We're gonna play to win the game. We're gonna play to score points, play to um embarrass our opponents." And then obviously the sportsmanship comes after the game when you're shaking hands on the field. You don't show sportsmanship. You play to win and play to put up points, which again, we saw that for the past 3 years or 2.5 seasons, I guess, in Detroit. They didn't care he didn't care what play calls he was calling if they were embarrassing to the other team. He just wanted to score points and win games, which Bears obviously need. Um, and then there was one more thing I would thought of while saying that. Now I don't remember. But I'll pass it over to you, Isaac, and then if I remember, I will pop back in. What did you like from this his introductory press conference today?
Yeah, I'll try to touch on some points you guys haven't touched on yet. First, a lot of people were kind of not, I wouldn't say bashing Ben Johnson, but they were saying, this guy seems like a nerdy head coach. He does, or a coach in general. He doesn't seem like he's a leader of men. And this press conference today, I think, should wipe away any of that doubt that those people had. I really appreciate someone that is extremely confident in themselves, and Ben Johnson appears to be like that type of person. He was very confident, and every answer he had, he was very firm about it. He's very direct, and I really appreciate that because we've had Bears head coaches in the past that were not direct. They would say, "Oh, I need to find out the why," or give little nicknames, stuff like that. I was tired of that, frankly. I want a better head coach, a guy that's straight up. This is how we're gonna win, this is how we're gonna do it. Another thing I really liked about Ben Johnson was when he was talking about, the Lions playbook and stuff like that. He was saying it's not going to be the same in Chicago. It's going to be different. We're gonna rebuild it. We're gonna bring it up from the studs. We're gonna, completely build this around Caleb Williams, around the personnel that we have in Chicago. And I really appreciate that as well because you know what, like the Detroit, as much as the I credit the success on offense, it's not going to be the same type of personnel in Chicago. We have different types of people on offense. We have a different, extremely different type of quarterback. So credit for Ben Johnson to say that. And I just think he's a very charismatic guy. Like I like he was making those little remarks about Matt LaFleur. I don't know if you guys noticed, but there were someone was trying to ask Ben Johnson a question, and they said, "Oh, to your right," and then Ben Johnson went like this. He was like, "Oh, well, like it's," and people were making fun of him, but like I'm pretty sure he just did that, to mess around with everyone. Um, and probably one of my favorite things that is not really an important aspect, but when they were talking about that play that he came up with against the Bears when Jared Goff started like stumbling and then they threw that touchdown and they were like, "Oh, you like it, right?" Like, so I don't know. I'm very optimistic with Ben Johnson. I think he's gonna be a really good head coach. And I'm really just happy that the Bears got this right. I like Joe said earlier, I had a feeling that it was gonna be Mike McCarthy, and I, I don't know. I probably would have been like, is there another team maybe I could start rooting for? Because the Bears, they just never seem to get it right. But I feel like they got it right. And in my opinion, even if this doesn't work out, at least the Bears made the move that was supposed to be the right move. Like I'm not gonna bash them as much if Ben Johnson doesn't work out versus if Mike McCarthy didn't work out, I would have been really on their head. Like you guys, are making the wrong decision. And then also I just want to give a little bit of credit to Ryan Poles because a lot of people are saying, Ryan Poles is not going to hire Ben Johnson because Ben Johnson's going to want to kick him out or this is gonna make Ryan Poles on the hot seat and stuff like that. But he, somewhere in there, Ryan Poles has stuck to his process. He got his guy, and hopefully Ben Johnson can be his savior as well as the rest of the Chicago Bears. So, Joe, did you have what you wanted to mention?
No, yeah, you brought it up actually. Uh, I wanted to talk about the fact that he said he's going to tear down his playbook and create a whole new playbook for Caleb Williams. I think that's very important. Now, obviously, I want to see the creativity from him and the stuff. I like the stuff he was doing in Detroit, but like again, like you mentioned, Jared Goff and Caleb Williams are two completely different quarterbacks, and you need to tailor a playbook around your special stud quarterback, which is what we think we have and what Ben Johnson believes he has in Caleb Williams. So he Ben Johnson was up here and Caleb Williams is down here. Ben Johnson right now has to come back down to even playing field with Caleb Williams, and then I'll be able to build up with what Detroit had. That might take a couple years, but I'm confident that that's what will happen with these two because they both seem like they really want to win games. Obviously, Caleb didn't win a lot of games this year, but he's a proven winner in college. And then Ben Johnson won a bunch of games the past 2 seasons with Detroit. So I guarantee you he wants to win right away. Now, will that happen? It might not, but I don't think we're gonna have another uh like 4-12 season, 4-13 season next year. I think we'll be closer to 500 than we were this year. But I'll pass it over to you, Eli. What were your takeaways from the Ben Johnson press conference?
So you guys both brought up absolute great points. And something you mentioned, Isaac, is that the fact that Ben Johnson is super direct. And as you said, that's not something we're used to. It's always, beating around the bush of what the actual problem is and just coming out right and saying what is wrong and what needs to be fixed. It took Matt Eberflus. No, I'll admit I don't think I ever once heard him say that the offensive line needs to play better. I don't think he ever said that, maybe Chris Morgan hasn't put our guys in the right spot. Maybe I need to do a better job of making this happen to where we can make adjustments and fix it. And in Ben Johnson's first introductory press conference, he says the offensive line probably didn't play up to the standard that it needed to last year. Right off the bat, like how difficult is it for, that should be the bare minimum for a head coach. And for Ben Johnson to come out in his, he's not even into the off-season training program. We're not in training camp. We haven't made it to the draft or free agency. And he's already saying this needs to be better. This is what we can do to fix it. And you brought it up in several ways, but it's just so important that he is already kind of looking at this roster, looking at the coaching staff and saying, this is what needs to happen for us to set ourselves up for success. And he brought up several times that him and Ryan Poles are going to be in lockstep with roster construction and with the draft and everything like that. So I'm excited to see, what that means. And I don't know if a lot of people caught it, but when he was asked about the offensive line, he did say, we're going to bring in a great offensive line coach to help boost this unit. So to me, all indications point to Chris Morgan being out the door. And that probably went without saying because a new coach likes to bring in their own staff members, but that screams celebration to me. I'm sure it wasn't all on Chris Morgan. The Nate Davis situation didn't help, but long story short, it seems like Ben Johnson is at least going to address problems, recognize problems, and attempt to fix problems without beating around the bush and saying that, just putting blanket terms over everything, over the whole football team. I can really respect that. I really appreciate that seems like where his head's at. Not only did Ben Johnson speak today, but, Ryan Poles, Kevin Warren, and George McCaskey all spoke today. Did you guys have any other comments on any of the comments that they made today? Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, so I want to bring this up. I want to get your guys' thoughts on it. So Mark Potash of the Chicago Sun-Times, he asked a question to George McCaskey about why was this time different with giving coach Ben Johnson all the money he wanted compared to like previous hires where the Bears have uh historically gone cheap with who they hire. And McCaskey was like, I disagree with the premise of that question completely, which is funny because that's exactly what they did. So I think, well, the rest of his answer was like, we wanted to get the best guy available because we believe in this team and stuff like that. But like, I want to get your do you have any reactions to his the part of the answer was uh with the premise he doesn't enjoy the premise of the question. Do you have any you guys have any reactions to that? I'll go with
Yeah,
to you first, Eli.
it is hilarious to me that it seems like Potash has a reputation of being that guy that just comes out and says the blunt question. He just blurts out whatever comes to mind, and I think it's really funny. But he's not wrong. He is absolutely not wrong, and I think it was a fair question. But at the same time, it's one of those. He's basically saying, "Hey, you're super cheap. Why did you open the checkbook this time?" Like it's I see it both ways. Mark's not wrong whatsoever, and I really like the question. And it's funny that he just straight up asked George. And I also think it's funny that George is kind of defending himself and saying, "Well, that's not the truth," but in all reality, that is the truth. And um, a lot of people are giving him credit and saying, "Well, George actually opened up the checkbook this time, so we should give him some credit." I think if you are an owner of a football team, a multi-billion-dollar organization, that's your job. That is your job, is to let your front office do the work and open the checkbook when they need it. Now, obviously, don't be reckless, but don't be a penny pincher. And that's what he's been the entire time he's taken over as Chicago. So that's kind of my thoughts on it. But Isaac, your thoughts on Art Potash's comments towards George McCaskey?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Eli. I think Mark is kind of that guy where he's just asking questions like that. And I was on Twitter this morning and I saw they were posting where Mark was sitting, I guess. And that's when I started was like, okay, this might, he might ask something crazy. But I think, you know what? Like I feel like the Bears fans have kind of had a bigger influence as of lately. And I'm gonna kind of do a timeline where I'm gonna list out some events, and it's not major events. It's just things that I've noticed. So like the Bears home game where they were screaming, sell the team chants and stuff like that. Like I'm pretty like McCaskey can say whatever he wants to say. But I think it had a big influence on George. He's like, okay, I actually have to do something this offseason. So stuff like that. And then today there was a fan that, or they were saying that Kevin Warren got a note during dinner where some fan gave it to him and he's like, please hire Ben Johnson. And the fan was like, yeah, Kevin, he actually gave us a couple shots after and he was a really nice guy and stuff like that. So I feel like the fans have kind of a big influence on the ownership, and they're never gonna ownership is never gonna admit that. Oh yeah, the fans, they're kind of pushing us to do this or they've influenced us in this way. But I think it's actually been a bigger influence than lately. But it's right. Like George, he hasn't really. He's been pretty cheap lately. The whole thing with having certain selected candidates for Ryan Poles to choose from. I don't know whether it's true or not, but yeah, I just think that was a funny question to ask, and it was a valid question at the same time. But yeah, that's basically my thoughts.
Yeah, that was just a whole funny situation. So, Joe, good on you bringing that up. Did you have anything else, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, going off of that, the Bears are gonna have, or not the Bears are gonna have to, but it's likely the Bears are don't will be opening up the checkbook for the coordinators because they want to or Ben Johnson wants to build a coaching staff that has experience around him to help him uh through the aches and pains aren't the right isn't the right word, but like the growth of being a first time head coach. It was reported uh originally that the Bears Glenn or sorry, not Glenn, but Johnson was interested in bringing in former Saints head coach Dennis Allen, who was been a DC in this league for a long time. The Saints defense had been good for a while before he took over as head coach. With him as DC, then when he became head coach, They got older. They got a little bit worse. But um, now it came out today that Ben Johnson doesn't actually know Dennis Allen. Like they don't have any former uh they have never crossed paths before. Now Dan Campbell and Aaron Glenn both know him and they both vouch for him. Um, but it's looking a little bit less likely that's going to happen. Now it still might happen. But what are you guys' thoughts on the Bears potentially bringing in Dennis Allen to be the DC, and then who do you think they'll bring in to be the OC? Even though they won't really be calling plays, they'll just be cooperating with Ben Johnson. I'll go to you first, Isaac.
For Dennis Allen to become the DC, I absolutely love it. I think he'll be a great DC because, like we've talked about in the past, some people are just better coordinators than they are head coaches, and I believe that's the. You could say that about Dennis Allen. You could say that about Matt Eberflus. Um, just a little sidetrack, but I don't know where he might end up. He might end up being the Falcons defensive coordinator. We'll see. But for Dennis Allen, I like it. And then for offensive coordinator, a lot of people wanted Hank Fraley, the Detroit Lions offensive line coach, but it appears that Brad Biggs was saying that he's probably going to stay in Detroit because he wanted to call plays on offense, and that obviously won't happen in Chicago. I've seen people say Mark Brunell. I think he was the quarterback's coach, or he was one of the coaches in Detroit. He might be the offensive coordinator in Chicago, but honestly, for offensive coordinator, like I'm just glad that we have someone that's really good at calling plays. So now just this guy has to just be kind of the organizer of everything, like making sure everything's running efficiently and helping Ben when he needs help. So haven't really looked that much into offensive coordinator candidates, but Eli, did you have any thoughts on Dennis Allen as a potential defensive coordinator? And then if you have any other names for offensive coordinator?
Yeah, I completely agree on the Dennis Allen point, and I wasn't aware that, you know, whoever you said reported that, Joe, that there's less interest than there was. Now that doesn't completely take him out of the running, but it is kind of scary to think about. There's plenty of good experienced defensive coordinators out there, but if Ben Johnson is looking for experience, then that is probably one of, if not the top candidate for a defensive coordinator position. Again, several talented coordinators out there, so it's not as big of a worry. Um, and then Isaac, as you kind of mentioned, taking from Ben Johnson's staff, it's been in the works, that, or the rumor mill is that Johnson doesn't want to raid, the Lions coaching staff from Dan Campbell, but at the same time, as a first time head coach, he's going to want to hire someone that maybe he's familiar with and has a little bit of experience with. And I'm the same way. I'd have to give more thought into, more offensive coordinators out there. Um, Certainly not our former offensive coordinator, Shane Waldron. Stay as far away from Chicago as possible. You are not welcome back. But, I would have to look at a full list of candidates, but I'm sure Ben Johnson has, his top candidates and then backup plans. I'm sure he's thought about this for a while now. So, um, it will be really interesting to see how that takes shape, um, as well as the whole conversation with George McCaskey continuing to write the checks and bring in a staff that Ben Johnson is comfortable with growing with. And he actually did kind of address, you know, someone asked him a question about the coordinators becoming first time head coaches, and they brought up names such as Adam Gase and a few other names. And he actually straight up was like, it has been a struggle for people like myself in this position coming from an OC to a head coach. But he listed several ways in which that can be avoided, in which he can avoid those pitfalls from being a first time head coach. So at least he is aware of the fact that it's a common trend for people in his position to fail, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to kind of avoid that. But it will be interesting to see how that shapes out. Joe, go ahead.
Or so yeah, speaking of pitfalls, uh Darren Orlovsky, right when the bear like immediately after the Bears hired him, shaking your head, I think you know what I'm about to bring up. Um, but he was basically right away with like, yeah, the Bears shouldn't have done this. This is a bad move. Uh, first time head coaches don't with like OCs to head coaches don't really work out, which is sometimes that's true. But I mean, see Kevin O'Connell, see Sean McVay, see I miss Kyle Shanahan. Now Shanahan's a different story because he came from like his father was a head coach. He worked with his father. Like that's I think that's completely different than like a Kevin O'Connell or a Sean McVay or even a Matt LaFleur. Like Shanahan has different history than those guys. But still, I think it's a little bit crazy to say like I get where he's coming from, Orlovsky, but like it's crazy to say this isn't going to work out right away. They should have hired Mike McCarthy because like yes, Mike McCarthy, um, like we talked about, he would have given the team stability and probably won 10 to 12 games a year. But we also said that he probably wouldn't have brought the Bears to a Super Bowl, which is what we all want. So, like, what are your guys' thoughts on what Orlovsky said? I'll start with you first, Eli.
Yeah, so in regards to Dan Orlovsky in general, I am tired of hearing his opinion on anything related to Chicago. It just seems like no matter what they do, it's the wrong decision. And part of it to me feels like it's because he's a former Detroit Lion. There's got to be some connection there. But in all seriousness, it just seems like the dude contradicts himself every step of the way. Up before Mike Vrabel was hired for the New England Patriots job, all that dude talked about was how great that Ben Johnson would be paired up with Drake May, and it was the best possible fit for Drake May, a rookie quarterback who's in a worse situation than Caleb Williams. I don't think that's a stretch to say. Um, no, I like Drake May, and I think he's going to be a good quarterback. But you can't just flip that narrative because it doesn't fit the QB that you think is going to develop the best. I don't think it works like that. So I'm in general with Dan Orlovsky. I used to look at him as kind of a guy that you could go to for an objective take, and he would give what he thought was best. But anymore, and maybe it's the Bears fan in me that just feels that way. It just feels like there's nothing concrete coming from him to substantiate the opinion he's giving about our situation. So that's my thoughts on Orlovsky. But Isaac, did you have anything regarding Orlovsky kind of saying that this isn't the right move for the Bears and Caleb Williams?
Like these TV personalities, they all have their opinions and it's fine. Some of them have crazy takes like Colin Cowherd and stuff like that. And Nick Wright, and there's things that people say that I agree with, and then there's things that people say I don't agree with. But for Dan to say that is kind of just weird because like Ben Johnson hasn't even like there's nothing that's happened yet. Like how can you say that about someone? And I feel like he's just a little upset. He just maybe doesn't like Bears fans or likes the Bears in general. And then for you, like you said, Eli, for him to say, "Oh, Mike Vrabel is the perfect fit for Drake May," how can you say that? Like Mike Vrabel is not the one that's going to be calling the plays for Drake May and stuff like that. Like he's a good fit for the Patriots. I don't know if I would say he's an excellent fit for Drake May specifically. Now with Ben Johnson, yeah, maybe hiring a first time head coach might have some challenges. I agree with that. But Dan also said when the Bears hired Matt Eberflus, I saw a clip of him saying, "Oh, this is a really great hire. Like this guy's gonna be, a culture changer for Chicago. Now I just need to see who they hire offensive coordinator." So how can you contradict yourself like that? So, you know, these TV personalities, they're gonna have contradictions a lot and stuff like that. I try not take it to like, oh, like I try not have these what they say really upset me. So it is what it is. He could think what he thinks, and I could think what I think at the end of the day. But yeah, I'm sure none of us really agree with what he's been saying, and he's obviously he hasn't been right a lot of times either. So there's that.
Yeah, and you can bet your house, your money, your 401k on if the Bears succeed this season under Ben Johnson, you're going to see some clip of Dan Orlovsky saying that it was the best move that the Bears could have made and how he was right all along and everything like that. But you are absolutely right. Everyone's entitled to their opinion and their take, and that's kind of the deal with network TV. You've got to generate viewership and you've got to say something to get people riled up. And the Bears fan base is a great fan base to get riled up because they will let you know for sure. But you know, it's it's not just Dan Orlovsky, but there's several takes out there that make you scratch your head. But as you kind of brought up, this was the no-brainer pick for Chicago. And if it doesn't work out, then, you know, not only are we cursed, but we can also look at it as if, you know, it just didn't work out, but this was the best possible avenue we could have taken. So that I think that's the best way to look at it. There were a few other minor things that happened across Bears Twitter. Um, DJ Moore tweeted a picture of Shadow the Hedgehog, kind of referencing the Sonic and Knuckles thing, getting Ben Johnson from Detroit. Isaac, I know you've talked about the Sonic and Knuckles thing before. Do you have any thoughts on DJ Moore tweeting out a picture of Shadow the Hedgehog?
Yeah, I think he said after he's like, "Oh, it's because I'm watching a movie with my kids," and I was like, "Okay," but maybe DJ Moore envisions himself as a different piece from Jameer Gibbs and Monty, and obviously he knows what he's doing when he tweets that out. Like, people are gonna talk about that. But no real thoughts. We'll just see what Ben Johnson has in plan for DJ Moore. Hopefully, not a bunch of screen passes and stuff like that. But Joe, did you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, okay. So I wrote my finger because I wrote an article on this now. It again, I um I I kind of put this to like he saw how DJ Moore saw how he used Ben Johnson used Jameer Gibbs and my David Montgomery in Detroit, and maybe he doesn't think he's going to be that, but he understands that he utilizes people well, and was using that gift to kind of portray that, and he's hoping that um, Ben Johnson will use him correctly, and like you said, not use him on a ton of screen passes, and um, yeah, a ton of screen passes, and doing the running stuff, and instead use him downfield like he's used to doing. Um, like, because the past, every season, but last season he's had above 10 yards per reception. Last season he had 9.9. Maybe he's just hoping that Ben Johnson uses him better. That's kind of his way of showing that. I don't know. Could be completely wrong. He could have just used a random gift, but that also could be the meaning. But I'll pass it back over to you, Eli.
So, two more things before we head out, unless we think of something else before we get on out of here. But it was reported that DJ Moore was on a family vacation prior to Ben Johnson's introductory press conference and flew in um, to attend that and see his new head coach's press conference. So I thought that was a pretty big piece because there were a lot of things said about DJ Moore in this season and everything, and regarding his character and stuff like that. But that's one thing. And it was, again, this is a separate thing, but it was reported that in the interview process, um, it was shown Ben Johnson was shown, and probably other candidates as well, for the Bears head coaching job. But it was shown that, or said rather, that there was film put up on the TV, and they were discussing heavily clock management and game management, and saying, what would you do in this position? Would you call a timeout here? What play call would you call here? What would you tell the QB? What would he hear? That kind of thing. Um, and it seems like on all reports that Ben Johnson absolutely nailed it. Obviously, he's the new head coach, so it goes without saying. But it seems like he appreciated that fact because he is a play caller and he enjoys what he does. So that's an underrated part of this hiring process that gives me hope moving forward. This Bears organization is doing things the right way and in a modern way. So unless we have anything else, Joe, you can go ahead before we head on out of here.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was unmuted. No, I don't have
Yeah.
anything else. Um,
Okay.
but
I have
well, I'll
something I
say
could.
this to
Oh,
anybody that's watching the video version. Um, if I looked completely dark the whole episode, it's because I didn't have my camera plugged in. I figured that out literally at the end of the episode. So now my camera is plugged in and it'll look better. If you're watching the video version, I am sorry about that. Um, but yeah, that's why I look different right now.
Yeah, all good. Isaac, before we head on out of here, you go ahead.
yeah. So Herb Howard asked Ben Johnson this question. Basically, he asked him, how do you instill confidence in yourself? And as he was kind of asking this in the terms of like, because he's going to be a first time head coach. And I really liked what Ben Johnson said. He was basically saying, I took the long road. Like, I was a quarterbacks coach, a tight ends coach, all that. He worked his way up. He was saying, I'm not a former player. I don't have a famous last name. In terms of like, I don't have any parents that coach in the NFL and stuff like that. But the thing I really liked what he said was, I had confidence in my like the personnel around me, like my coworkers, and they also had confidence in me, and so that's helped me get to where I am today. And then he was saying, I had a lot of ups and downs, but every time I came out on top. Like he was the best at what he did every single time. So he was saying that, that's what I'm going to carry on when I become a head coach here in Chicago. I'm going to strive to be the best head coach I can be for this franchise. And it's just getting me fired up for for this season. I already want, 2025 season to come around. But yeah, that's basically what I wanted to bring up for Ben Johnson.
It is definitely a nice change of pace for our head coach to have a personality. And it sounds crazy, but that's the fact of it, is that he's not just giving you the run of the mill, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. He's embracing the culture of Chicago already, just in these few short days that he's been here. And I'm sure it's only going to get even more, yeah, even better throughout this off season. But with that being said, it should be an upcoming fun off season. This is what Bears fans have lived for, but it seems like with Ben Johnson, there's a plan moving forward. There's a goal in mind, and there is a culture being set out to establish in Chicago. So it'll be fun paying attention to what moves they make in free agency and the draft, and reports from training camp throughout the summer. It's going to be it's a fun time to be a Bears fan, at least seemingly so. So that being said, do you guys have anything else before we get on out of here? All right, that is going to do it for this episode of the Bear Down Buzz podcast. Ben Johnson, the new head coach of the Chicago Bears, the move everybody waited to happen. This is going to be a fun off season. But again, before we get on out of here, be sure to go like our TikToks, YouTube Reels, watch these episodes, follow these guys on Twitter. They do a lot of great content for multiple teams across the league. And I'm sure they've got a lot of content coming out with all the news that keeps breaking. And of course, the offseason is always a busy time, as we mentioned, for the draft, free agency, and everything like that. So I'm sure they'll have player breakdowns, everything regarding staff moves for this Bears team. So be sure to follow along with everything they've got going on. But again, this has been the Bear Down Buzz podcast, and we will see you next episode. Enjoy these championship games this weekend. Should be some fun ones, but we're going to head on out of here. See you next time.